Hey guys, welcome. This is week 2 of book club for the book The Way Out by Alan Gordon. And week 2, we're going to be talking about chapters 3 and 4. I have some people on with me. I have the chat enabled, and I want to cover a few of the principles, but then also leave a lot of time for discussion through the chat and then probably some live stuff as well. So, no pressure to be interactive, but I also want to include you guys. So basically, with chapter 3, it's all about how fear produces pain. It's the pain-fear cycle. So the way we react to the pain determines how much the brain magnifies it or amplifies it. So one study, super interesting, they had people looking at pictures that were either pleasant or scary, and they had a hot probe. So sometimes people amplified pain when they saw a scary picture. And sometimes they actually even felt pain when there was no hot probe, but that only happened with the scary pictures and not with the pleasant pictures. So our brain can produce pain. It can basically magnify the normal signals that we're getting when we're in a fear-based state. And a lot of times, basically, he says the fear can be kind of a gradual onset. So like you've always been a little bit worried because of maybe the family life you grew up with, and you're a little on guard. That's how my nervous system was. I grew up in a very religious atmosphere. And so I was like always a little worried that, I was bad and doing things wrong. So my nervous system, I didn't have a lot of, I didn't have any really big traumatic events, but it was just kind of a gradual onset of just like constantly being in fear. Okay. And then there could be like a stressful situation that really sets your nervous system off. Like you didn't really notice anything until, med school or loss of a job or a big life change, or even something exciting, going on a trip, something like that. And then you could also have, a lot of people, it does start with an injury. He gives the example of someone playing basketball and, hurting his back while playing basketball, but then it just doesn't heal. It just doesn't go away within the normal healing time, 3 to 6 months, becomes chronic because of that fear of the pain. So what do you guys think about that? The pain fear cycle, everyone familiar with that? Yeah, you can just type in the chat if you want. And so far, everyone's being kind of quiet, but I'm fine with I'll just keep talking. I can talk this whole time. I just want to include you guys too. But basically, the pain fear cycle, they've shown this with neuroscience, like I said, with these experiments. And Alan Gordon says there's basically 3 main habits or traits that we have that can put the brain on high alert. So one is worrying. Most people that I work with, everyone that I worked with has related to worrying in some way. Maybe they're not worrying about a lot of life situation things, but they do worry about pain, right? So basically worrying is not helpful. We can get into the nervous system state of flight when we're worrying a lot. It's this state of, instead of running from a tiger, we're running from all the possibilities that we could get hurt. And so all of the imperfections, we're trying to find problems, trying to fix them, and worrying. So even things that haven't happened yet and may never happen, we're feeling in our emotions as if they are in the real present moment, right? So puts our nervous system on high alert. It puts the brain into a fear mode, which means normal signals become amplified and turn into pain. The brain is more likely to interpret pain from a normal signal if you're in a fear-based state. Yeah, and so people are saying yes, they can relate. And being self-aware, so automatic, it's very familiar. Yeah, everyone's quite familiar. Yeah, same, right? Like, and all of this really is to say in this book, like, this is so normal. He explains why it's normal, partially because of our biology. If we just look at the source of what pain serves evolutionarily, it a lot of times is related to like, don't do that activity, don't eat those berries, restrictive things in our lives so we don't get hurt again. So this is all very normal, and it's good news, because when we realize that we have this pain fear cycle and we can change how we respond to the pain, then the brain actually produces the pain less and less and less. And Alan Gordon gives several stories of people who had associated their pain with typing or playing the violin or certain chairs, things like that. And then when they deconditioned that response of pain with those activities or foods or things like that, then the brain feels safe, it doesn't produce those symptoms, and we're able to enjoy life without restrictions because it really wasn't about those things in the first place. Yeah. Okay. So back to the chat, the subconscious, the fear, worry, threat can become so subconscious and embedded that it can be hard to join the dots. Yeah, it becomes our normal baseline. And what's really interesting too about that, Sinead, is like when we're so used to being on guard, it doesn't actually feel very safe to just relax and let our guard down. So this is a lot of what I'm teaching people most of the time, is like not only decrease those anxieties and fears and notice how you're reacting to the pain, but like be in that calm state more of the time. Just like start to teach your nervous system that this is the normal, because we're used to, being on high guard and high alert as normal and safe. I'm doing air quotes. Yeah. Okay. Okay, question. Life is full of time pressures, even to get to a class at the gym, to meet a friend on time. How do you get out of seeing that as pressure instead of just normal life? Well, I guess, you can look for examples of maybe people who, I like looking for people who, they don't seem to feel that same pressure. Like we all have the same kind of circumstances. Some people get very stressed out about arriving on time or see it as pressure, things like that. Other people, basically what Alan Gordon says in this chapter is you want to have a little more of that attitude of like, things are okay, this isn't a big deal. And pain teaches us how to respond that way, but it can help with other areas of the life too, like, pressure about time, or pressure about looking perfect, or pressure about perfectionism in the job, right? So basically, when you notice any of those fear-based states, for you, it might be different what you're thinking about that gives you that sense of pressure around time. So really just starting to notice, first of all, not everyone feels that. This is optional. What, kind of thoughts am I thinking about that put pressure on me? Maybe I'm making it into a big story that's really not that. And I'm shaming myself, and that's keeping me trapped, whatever it is. And then, just kind of softening that, accepting that that's where you are. It makes sense that's where you are, but also there may be other reframes. And, honestly, coaching is very helpful for things like that, because you can't always see in your own life. As you said, it kind of just seems normal, right? It just seems like the fish swimming in the water, and they're like, what water? This is just how I am. I don't even feel stressed. This is just, isn't it normal to, what I would do is like make lists at night to go to sleep. Isn't it normal to just like relax by making a list of what you're going to do the next day? Like that was relaxing to me. And now I'm like, wow, I was so anxious and I didn't even realize it. So yeah, just keep observing, and that can be your best way to just, there's no really right or wrong here. It's just, is this working for you? Is it working for you to, make a big deal out of all of these things that could possibly happen? And here's what we know too. When you're in a fight or flight state, when you're in a survival state, you're not actually thinking with your prefrontal cortex. It's like survival brain thinking. So even the ideas that you get and the help that you're giving people and it's probably not even as effective. Like, it's probably not as helpful as you think, right? The best thing is to, know what's going on, start to decrease the fear, start to see that you're safe. You're safe, even if you arrive 2 minutes late to something. Like, it's not a survival threat, right? Like, maybe you prefer not doing it, but we don't want the survival state reaction with these normal like variances of life. We want to expand the window of tolerance, they call it in nervous system terminology. Okay, so all right, welcome everyone who keeps joining. Basically, we talked about how the brain can get on high alert from different habits or activities, things that we do. And the first is worrying. So please notice when you're worrying and just know that that's optional. It's really not even, helpful. Basically, I've heard a quote somewhere that 80% of what you worry about never even happens. And if it does happen, most of the time you handle it better than you think you're going to. It's only a very small percentage of the time, right, that things have gone bad in our past. We never want to repeat it. So we worry, but we cause ourselves pain and discomfort and emotions in the present tense when we're, actually just sitting in our desk at our desk, or we're just, sitting in our house with our kids, but then we're having all the emotion as if something bad is actually happening and a tiger's chasing us, right? And Karen says, I found the fear by another name section particularly helpful. Yes, I think I marked that too. That's on page 44. And sometimes we're like, well, I don't feel fear. I don't feel anxiety. But any of these fear-based emotions are in the category of your brain perceives it as dangerous, not safe. So it could be frustration, despair, stress, anguish, anxiety, annoyance, dismay, and anything else that puts you on high alert. So I want you to just take a second and think about when you have pain, typically, you might have different reactions, but think about, what types of emotions do you have? Is it more fear or worry? Or is it more like frustration, despair, stress, anguish, anxiety, annoyance? That's so common, especially when we know this work for a while and we have our symptom and we're like, oh, just wish I didn't have it. I'm just so annoyed. Why do I have to keep going through this? Anything else that puts you on high alert? In fact, I just want to maybe even just reframe it or give you another way to look at it. I'm going to share my screen here. Just a sec. If I can. Okay. I had to close all my tabs and stuff. Okay, share screen. If you look at it as the survival states, I like this little chart that just summarizes, you've probably heard of fight and flight and freeze and fawn. But just really quickly, fight, that's like anger, rage, irritation, and frustration at yourself. So you might be going into fight, but you're turning it against yourself when you have pain. So that's a survival state. That's going to tax your nervous system. That's going to make the brain perceive things as dangerous when they're not and cause pain. So notice what types of state you go into. Is it more the, anger, irritation, frustration, feeling like it's really unfair, noticing imperfections in other people, racing obsessive thoughts? That's where it's like hard to relax with both fight and flight. And then flight, we talked a little bit about just that like need to outrun any possible problems. There's panic, urgency, anxiety, worry. I've got to be on time for everything. There's stressors of life, everything, it's like that with that mindset, these people probably, I resonated with this before. I was like, oh, once this is over, then I can relax. And then something else would come up and something else would come up. But what we actually know is our brain gets addicted to, those stress chemicals. And so we're actually, creating scenarios to worry about and produce that cortisol and adrenaline that we're used to, right? So flight is that cortisol, adrenaline, frenetic energy, perfectionism, workaholic, busy. This is like, I want to heal perfectly. I have to heal right now. If I do more, I can heal faster. That's going to slow down your healing, right? That's part of the pain fear cycle and will cause more pain. fearful thoughts, overthinking. And then freeze is more of the hopeless, confused, trapped, overwhelmed, shame. I'm not good at this. Something really is wrong with me. I don't even want to be around people. You want to disconnect and hide. This physically can give you feeling foggy, spaced out, fatigue, lifeless, collapse, dissociated, not feeling enough, good enough, feeling abandoned, unwanted, helpless. And you might even be hyper aware of the body sensations or feel kind of numb about them. But again, I just want to put this into perspective. When he talks about fear amplifies pain. You can just see, oh, fear is a survival state. It's like, in basic terms, one of these 4 survival states. You can get into nuances of mixed states and stuff, but, maybe you're starting to look at these and see what kind of typical reactions do I have to pain? And, how can I change that to teach my brain that pain is just a sensation and it's neutral and it's not dangerous? Fawn is a super interesting one too. I did not know anything about fawn until a couple years ago. Turns out I've lived most of my life in fawn, because I'm a great people pleaser and really concerned about others, really empathic and empathetic. And so this is like over apologizing, people pleasing, not having boundaries, highly aware of others' body cues. It's like you can walk into a room and you're like, oh, I know what that person's feeling. And you're just scanning the room constantly to see how everyone is. Prioritizing others' needs above your own, can't be happy if others aren't. And then that leads to feeling taken advantage of, exhaustion, burnout, and disconnection from your own body or needs. So, maybe you might not go into fawn as you're reacting to your pain. You might go more into like fight or flight or freeze, but also just notice, this is kind of this subconscious stuff going on in the background that has probably contributed to a lifetime of some of these survival states as coping mechanisms, which is just good to know, because when they come up now, we can give ourselves new tools. We can regulate our nervous system in different ways so we don't have to continue to feel like everything is dangerous, and we can retrain our nervous system to have this bigger window of tolerance, like I said. Okay, I'm going to go back to chat, see where we are here. So it's often a trauma response. It's something we do to control or to try to control the worst case scenario. Yeah. Trauma response. I do think of survival state equals trauma response. It's just a kind of softer way of saying it. It's like more than what your nervous system can handle. And so you're going into a survival state, a responsive state to try to protect, rather than to live your life, in this rest and repair state, feeling safe. I wanted to add a little point and actually give you a little more information too from some research that I found. And this is called the pain catastrophizing scale. And they use this in pain science. And so when he talks about different ways that you can react to pain, like those different emotions, when it can be subtle. So when they're measuring how you react to pain in pain research, and they use this pain catastrophizing scale, what they've found is that people who are more likely to catastrophize pain, they can actually, it's statistically significant that they are more likely to have new acute injuries, for their acute injuries to turn chronic. And for if they're going in for surgery, if they give them this pain catastrophizing scale and they score above, 32, I think it is, or something, if they score above a certain amount and they're high catastrophizers, they can predict that they'll have a slower recovery and more complications. And that shows itself to be, they can accurately predict that. So I want you to look at the pain catastrophizing scale. I'm going to put it up on the screen. And this is one way of assessing if you're responding with fear to the symptom versus what we'll learn in chapter 5 with somatic tracking, where you're just like, oh, it feels like, this blobby green thing that's slowly moving, right? That's different than when we go into fear about it. So I'm going to share the pain catastrophizing scale. And I want you to think to yourself, when you feel pain, how you would rate these types of thoughts. From 0, not at all, like I never ever think that when I have pain, or 4, all the way up to 4, if all the time when you have pain, that's a common thought for you. Okay, so I'm going to read them real quickly. There's only 13. I worry all the time about whether the pain will end. I feel I can't go on. It's terrible, and I think it's never going to get any better. It's awful, and I feel that it overwhelms me. I feel I can't stand it anymore. I've become afraid the pain may get worse. That's like a common thing to think, right? Like, who would think that's catastrophizing? That's what I want to point out here. Like, the fear can be subtle. So when we think, well, I don't really fear it, but we are like, I just don't ever want to, I feel like I can't stand it anymore. That's still that danger signal to your brain that makes it produce more pain, right? The pain fear cycle. 7, I think of other painful experiences. 8, I anxiously want the pain to go away. That's such a common one. People come to a coaching call and they're like, I anxiously want it to go away. And it makes sense. But also the nervous system, is ratcheted up when we're feeling like that. So it's going to be harder, and it's going to be a slower process to heal when that is a predominant thought. You don't have to prevent yourself from thinking these thoughts, even just starting to observe. This is what I would recommend. Just start to observe when these thoughts come up and just say, that's my brain catastrophizing. So, they're going to come up, but you also don't have to believe every thought that your brain thinks and reinforce it. And just like pain, eventually those thoughts will go away or be less. Okay, so I can't seem to keep it out of my mind. I keep thinking about how much it hurts. I keep thinking about how badly I want the pain to stop. There's nothing I can do to reduce the intensity of the pain. I wonder whether something serious may happen. Okay, so this was not in the book. This is in Pain Science. I've seen it on Curable referenced, but I thought you guys might find that interesting as a little extra way to assess, am I responding with fear or not? Because it can be subtle. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments so far? This resonating? We'll go back to, okay, remember I was saying things that put the brain on high alert, worrying, putting pressure on yourself. So putting pressure on yourself is like, you high achievers, this is part of the flight nervous system state. You're always wanting to achieve more. When you do reach a goal, you don't really celebrate it. You're just on to the next thing. That's putting pressure on ourselves. In the book, he gives an example of someone, he teaches them the process and they're like, okay, I want to do that right now. Basically, this urgency, putting pressure on yourself. A lot of people who put pressure on themselves when they do have a symptom, I've done this a lot myself, make it mean something about them. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. I'll never get this. I'm not good enough. That is putting pressure on yourself, and that will cause more pain. And then self-criticism, you guys, this is so common. Many of us were raised to think that we have to be kind of hard on ourselves, and we have to talk really tough to ourselves, and we have to not really let ourselves relax, and that doing less is going to mean that we aren't going to heal. And just this kind of paradigm of pressure on myself is going to help me change. But we actually know from research, you cannot shame someone into change. It's the least effective way. You might get a temporary change if someone is, really ashamed and you're shaming them, or you're shaming yourself. You might temporarily change, but for lasting change, self-criticism is actually so detrimental. Your nervous system perceives it as dangerous, right? So for me, I had a lot of digestive issues, ulcerative colitis, IBS, and I think one of my biggest triggers or, danger signals was just me being so critical of myself, because I was really trained to see the problems in myself and fix those. So it's kind of well-meaning, but it's like the focus was always like scanning the environment for failures or dangers or how I could be better, and then never really celebrating any of the good things and feeling like relaxed. And I really didn't know what the rest and repair state was like on a physiological level. I don't think, I was really believing that it was safe to live like that. Okay. So Renee finds it interesting you get given this scale in pain, but never get it given any tools to help you stop catastrophizing, right? Yeah. So when I was doing some research for my podcast, I found that pain catastrophizing scale and kind of went down the rabbit hole of research of, like they'll suggest other articles when you have one. So, or they'll reference them in research, but basically what I found in the research, and it's actually really backed up in this book, this is exactly what he says too, is that mindfulness is that cure for catastrophizing. So mindfulness, in Buddhist principles is like, things are okay and everything's going to be all right, just, well, I probably didn't summarize that exactly. Don't quote me on that. But with this, getting into that safe state, that rest and repair state, that is what gets you out of that fear state where pain is amplified. So yes, being more mindful. In chapter 5, we're going to talk about somatic tracking, and that's the really the key principle, the key activity in pain reprocessing therapy for being mindful rather than catastrophizing pain. From this chapter, I like how Alan keeps it in the breaking the pain fear cycle on page 46 with reprocessing means changing the way your brain interprets the pain. Yes, exactly. Reprocessing, even in real time, if you're doing some somatic tracking and it's not changing the pain, but it's changing the way that you're talking about and conceiving of it, right? You're like imagining as a red fiery dot or something, you're like changing the way the brain is processing the pain, then and interpreting the pain, then the brain, just like, classical conditioning, Pavlov's dogs, it will produce it less and less. He uses the example of the toddler that falls. So imagine a kid falling at the park and you see them like look around, and sometimes you see them like make eye contact with their parent and they start to cry, and the parent, really reacts and the kid cries more. And sometimes you notice a kid that, looks around, no one sees them and they're fine. So, or the parent is just like, oh, you're so big. Wow, you're so strong. Good job. You're okay. And the kid, is like, oh, I'm okay. Right. So pain is a little like that. When we respond with fear, it just, amplifies all of the danger signals. And yes, something really is wrong. And it really starts to feel like something's wrong because this pain is real. But basically, there's this quote that Alan said, fear of the pain itself is what keeps neuroplastic pain alive. And he said, my fear of chronic pain turned my pain chronic, right? So that's the conundrum we get into is, two people, one might injure, they might have the exact same injury, right? They both, hurt their back a certain way. And after 3 to 6 months, one person heals and the other person still has it. That's where we know that nervous system, the fear response, that high guard, that's what's causing it to be long-term and neuroplastic. But people may have questions about that. They may doubt that, right? He says there's a few barriers. So I think we got to most of chapter 3. We can move on to chapter 4 is like, what are those barriers that we have to believing that this is neuroplastic so that we can heal? Oh, and by the way, from the Boulder back pain study, I found this super interesting. The people who had the biggest change in their average pain were also the people who had the biggest change in belief about their pain indicating injury. So the more that people started to believe something other than pain means damage or injury, then the more they had a change and decrease in pain. So really starting to think it's not the chair, it's not the walking, it's not the food, it's not the light or the wind, but it's these, conditioned responses, and I can change them by that pain reprocessing, which is reacting more neutrally and with less fear. But there are going to be blocks, and the normal one is biology, because if I eat a poisonous, or no, I won't say poisonous, if I eat a berry and then I have some stomach issues later, then, even the smell of the berry or the thought of the berry later may make my stomach protect and clench up and make me sick, right? Make me feel nauseous just thinking about it or smelling it. So in our biology, it's for our safety that if we have like a broken bone, that we stop and we take care of it rather than we just keep going and, risk further damage. But as they say in this book, and I really believe, and with all the research we're finding out now, most pain, not even just chronic pain, but most pain is neuroplastic. It's not because of a structural cause or an actual injury. And I'm going to go back to the chat. I think it's good to explore the root of the fear and the catastrophic thoughts, which are often misinformed health beliefs. Then you can begin to rewire. Applied CBT is good for this. So yeah, exactly. Like learning just what the current neuroscience even says is so helpful. Like some of this stuff, because I started my, healing like 5 years ago, before Curable and before this book came out. So it was harder to at least Dr. Sarno said ulcerative colitis was one of the things you could heal. So I had that belief. But basically, when we have a lot of doctors that have told us over our lives, you're going to have this forever. This is always going to hurt you when the weather changes. Like those little things I used to tell people as a physical therapist, stuff that I was taught, and they, there's probably 1 or 2 people out there that have me in their head saying, my physical therapist told me, that arthritis is never going away or whatever. So yeah, changing those health beliefs can be so, so helpful. There is the appendix has that assessment, or like questions you can ask yourself to help know how neuroplastic pain behaves and if that's what you are dealing with. Because that's the biggest question I always get, is just like, is it neuroplastic or not? What if it's structural, right? That just fear of like, well, what if it is structural? So, you'll want to build that case, and here's what he says, just as general questions I want you to think about for yourself. This is on page 60. Does your pain seem to ebb and flow based on your stress level? Like that's a good sign that it's neuroplastic. That is a sign it's neuroplastic. It's based on stress. When you're not based on, it fluctuates, as your stress does, I should say. When your symptoms first started, did they come out of nowhere? Now, if yours didn't start that way, don't be like, oh, okay, that means mine's not. This is just a really good way to know that yours is neuroplastic, because when you're saying there's an injury and all you did was wake up in the morning, Dr. Schubiner, do you remember that part where he tells Alan Gordon in this book that a car accident was like, there's no way he got hurt from that? A car accident at 5 miles per hour. He's like, it's not even enough to move the water molecules in your body. So that was enough to give Alan belief that this is not dangerous. He didn't actually hurt himself, even though he had so much pain. There's no injury. And within hours, he had a lot of back pain, and that was totally gone because he changed his belief and he broke the pain fear cycle. Because, most of us associate a car crash, even at a low speed, with that could do some damage. And then when we have pain, that, really makes us believe or question, what if this is structural? And here's what's hard, you guys. I know, especially like in groups like this, in the Tell Me About Your Pain Facebook group, if you're in that with 14,000 people and people asking for advice with, a little bit of information, we're going to tell you to get it checked out, because what we want to rule out is basically, we don't want to rule out every little, it might be a disc herniation, because so many pain-free people have that. But it can get confusing, because if you get a diagnosis like that, you're like, well, it is structural because it's tendonitis, right? Or something. And in this world, that's really not considered structural. So it can be confusing, but basically we want people to get checked out for if it's like cancer or tumor, if it's a fracture, if it's infection, or if it is, there are some severe bone on bone type of cases that may not be neuroplastic with arthritis, but that's really what those scans are good for. But one of those things that can amplify our fear and our pain and be a barrier to our belief is a medical diagnosis. That's something he talks about. So a medical diagnosis, like a hip labral tear, you might say, but I actually have a hip labral tear. I saw it on an MRI, and so I have a structural thing. But there's this crazy study that I found that studied young, healthy athletes that had no pain, and they did MRIs on them, because usually we don't do MRIs on pain-free people. So young, healthy athletes performing, well in an athletic sense, no pain, 89% of them had a hip labral tear. So when we're blaming these things on structural causes, it's scoliosis, or it's this SI joint imbalance, or it's actually tight muscles on this side. We want to see the stress is causing those types of things, or those normal signals to be interpreted as pain, but those things are really not dangerous. Like we talked about last week, that woman with scoliosis, 70 degrees, 73 degrees, back shaped like an S. Most people, as a physical therapist, I would have said, of course, she's going to have pain, like that's severe. It's probably caused wedging and all this. So she does PRT, and within 8 weeks, she's at a 0 to 1 out of 10 pain on average. So, and she didn't stretch or change the structures. So we just kind of have this paradigm because of biology, just how we are as surviving people, that we want to tie pain to an activity and not do that again. And then because of medical diagnoses. And then the other thing he says is the other barrier that can be a really big barrier is conditioned responses. So for me, conditioned responses were a lot of times about food. And so I could have eaten a food during a stressful time in my life, had, a lot of digestive problems, and then thought to myself, really, at a visceral level, can't eat that food again. And for other people, it might be walking or sitting, or the type of chair they're sitting in, or the conditioned response might be about typing, or, looking at a light, or being in a room with lights, or things like that, right? So we want to see those as these are harmless things, but the brain has attached a response, a story to it. And then now that we're doing that movement, this pain that's being produced is not because there's an actual injury that needs medical attention, a fracture, an infection. It's just normal feedback from the body, but the brain's interpreting it as dangerous and producing pain. Yeah. So musculoskeletal pain is not neuroplastic from the list posted the other day. Oh, I would say it is usually. So musculoskeletal pain, let me just make sure I'm understanding, but like, I would say if someone's like, I have neck pain, it's like, on the side of my neck where the muscles are, that's what you mean, musculoskeletal pain. And if you do look on that list, they'll have all kinds of examples, but you can't, do everything, but they'll say like, chronic hip pain, chronic neck pain, chronic back pain. I think the list that you're talking about was probably from Dr. Schubiner's Unlearn Your Pain. But I know on that list, he does have things like, just different body parts pain. So basically what he says, this is another quote. Actually, I can grab it real quick. This is from Unlearn Your Pain. And this is just to get an idea of what kind of symptoms can be neuroplastic, because the brain, it's like the brain can turn these signals on and off like light switches, right? So these neural pathways, it can be produced by the brain and it can feel like nerve pain, or it can even activate inflammation in some cases, but it's all because of these predictive coding from subconscious responses and from what the brain predicts will happen. Okay, so here's this list of symptoms. So this will answer your question, I think, Tracy. Nervous system activation can produce tingling, numbness, or burning sensations, as well as tinnitus and anxiety. Activation of the muscles can produce pain in almost any part of the body. So that's neuroplastic, right? Does that make sense? Activation of the GI system can cause abdominal pain or bloating. So, right, sometimes we're like, well, this is a physical thing, it's bloating. Yeah, the brain can produce that by, the nervous system controls digestion. So it's very easy for the brain and nervous system to make these changes. Heartburn, it causes extra acid. Yeah, that's what it's causing. It's not the extra acid just, for some medical reason being produced. It's because of your stress, right? Heartburn, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation. When the genitourinary system is activated, one can experience pain. So this like pelvic pain, all those, itching, burning, urinary frequency. That was an interesting one for me. When I read that, I was like, oh, okay. And so I was able to like change my incontinence that I thought, I just have after 4 kids. I don't have it anymore because genitourinary stuff is neuroplastic. Cardiovascular. And I was a PT, right? I was like, well, it has to be about the strength of the muscles. And no, it's about the nervous system. Okay. Cardiovascular activation can produce palpitations and a rapid heart rate. Alterations in blood flow can produce migraine headaches. And the freeze and submission response typically causes fatigue and or depression. So just to give you an idea, it can be mild or severe. It can occur. Okay, I'll just read this last paragraph. It's so good. Pain caused by nervous system activation can occur suddenly with an acute spasm of muscles, or it can develop gradually over time. It can occur in the back, neck, head, abdomen, pelvis, or almost anywhere in the body. This pain can be constant or occasional. It can be mild or severe, and it can feel like an ache, a numbness, a shooting pain. For people who suffer in these various ways in various places because of mind-body syndrome, there's no tissue breakdown or physical disease in the body, yet the pain is real. The pain is caused by the activation of a neural pathway, right? So hopefully that helps. I like to give you like some stuff from the book and then like some extra stuff that relates. This is from, this is Dr. Schubiner's Unlearn Your Pain. Great, great resource. But as far as accessibility, I really like The Way Out. It's such an easier read. It's fun. It's easier to understand. And Unlearn Your Pain is like, you want to go deep and like get into the research and really like prove to your brain stuff. Like this is awesome, that book. Okay. What can I do when the pain comes on related to the action? Yes. Oh, hey, Scotty. Yes. That is such a good question. I think, I'm not sure which chapter it is that we'll talk about graded exposure, but basically retraining the belief that the action is what's causing the pain. So he does talk about, actually, this is a good segue. Thank you for that question. The last part of chapter 4 is what we do about it, how we can overcome this pain fear cycle. And especially if it's related to the action, that's a harder one to believe. Just like for me, having a food related thing, it was hard for me to associate like this stomach issue is because I'm stressed, not because I ate salad last night, right? So the main thing you want to do, he calls it searching for exceptions. If you are incurable and some of that language, they call it detective for the opposite. That's what I call it, because I like people to think of like gathering so much evidence. You're like one of those detectives from the movies that they have their little notebook in their pocket and they're just like, oh, there's a, a hair over here, right? They're looking for any little crumb, any little trace. And that attitude of looking for when you feel better, that if you're going to be preoccupied with anything, try to turn it to that feeling better and noticing when you feel better. Because right now, most of us, our brains are in this state of fear, looking for when it's bad, and not even noticing when it's not. So I have an example for me that I have like a history of like this back injury from snowboarding that a few times a year, it, quote unquote, flares up. I know how to handle it a lot differently now, but I'm definitely just like this observer now. And I really notice some of the beliefs I have. It's that when I am sitting, I'm pretty fine. But when I go to move, if I'm like going from a stationary position to moving and anything movement related, if I'm like bending, twisting, that would cause it. So I noticed I had that belief and I wanted to be detective for the opposite for that. And I did actually notice there was one time when I was doing the curbside pickup at the store and I was like just feeling like, I don't know, kind of people pleasy, helping the lady, and I just like picked up the big thing of dog food and put it in the car. And I was like, wait, I didn't have pain because I think I was distracted. I was by this other person. I didn't want to look, like I couldn't do it maybe subconsciously, right? So this all happened and I was like, okay, there's one little thing that I would have expected pain and I didn't have it. This is like a gratitude journal, those research studies with gratitude. When you shift to looking for 3 things you're grateful for every day, not only do you start to find those things more and more, it actually changes the way your brain is looking at the world. So when we talk of getting out of these fear-based states and, switching out of reacting with fear, this is one of the best ways we can prove to our own brain that this is true, is we start to have an evidence sheet, or you have that notebook and you search for exceptions, like really start to get your brain looking for when you're expecting something to happen and it doesn't, and you feel better than you think you're going to. And usually what we find, it's when we're distracted, when we're, it could be like, even the other example I had from my back was like the doorbell rang and I got up quickly. And I think I didn't have time to like do this like subconscious thing my brain would do and tense up to protect and then cause pain. Excuse me. So instead of like going and thinking like, oh, I'm going to stand up, so this, subconsciously all happened so quickly that my back would tense up to protect, and then I would actually get pain as I would stand up because my back's all tight. Those 2 instances where it happened just kind of spontaneously and I wasn't thinking about it, I did a movement, I didn't feel pain. So then I proved to myself like, okay, this is all just neuroplastic. Nothing is wrong. Everything's good. And the more you prove to yourself, that can be, like I said, the best evidence ever compared to reading 100 case studies of other people and books and what they did and getting into flight about how to heal. Start just looking for what's already happening in your life. And the other thing is building a case. So again, looking for those types of things of like, does it come and go? Does it, did it come out of nowhere? Have you tried all these medical things and they haven't worked? Have you had a lot of different symptoms throughout your life? Do you have a history or tendency to have an anxious personality? All of those go towards your case. So you can look in the appendix. You can also look at Dr. Schubiner's FIT criteria. It's a little more in detail, but the appendix is a really good place to start too. Start building your case. So he gives a couple examples of people who are like, okay, mine started in both hands at the same time. That's a good example of a case that is very rare medically for that to happen, like both exactly at the same time happen. But when it's mirroring, it's a good sign it's neuroplastic. So get as many of those as you can. You don't have to have everything. And if one of them doesn't apply to you, don't make it mean, well, that means I'm not neuroplastic. Just read what's there. If it applies to you, that is a good sign that it's neuroplastic, but don't use it the opposite way. And then, yeah, Rachel, so true about tensing up before a movement, you may think may be bad for you. Oh my gosh, yeah. And I've even noticed I had this crazy example where I was watching a yoga teacher do a move and I felt pain in my knee. So those little examples of predictive coding where I'm like, I watch her doing it. I'm thinking in my head, not consciously, of course, I'm going to be doing this soon. This is, an area that, has this issue. And then my brain actually produces pain. So I just had to laugh. It actually was such a good way for me to get rid of my knee pain so quickly, was to see something like that happen where I saw someone do a movement and I felt pain. If you start talking about your pain and you feel it more, someone asks about your pain and you feel it more, those are good signs that it's neuroplastic. Let's go to Nat. You've raised your hand. What's up? Do you want to unmute? Hi.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thanks for explaining everything. Super helpful. I caught myself doing all the things that you said that we shouldn't last night.
Yeah.
Where will
Well,
this
that's
go?
good
Why is
news.
it happening? Oh, I wish it would go, then I can carry on with the rest of my life. This is stopping me from exercising.
Yeah.
All of those things.
The
So
catastrophizing. Yeah.
it's just annoying and frustrating, right? And you're like, oh, please just go. What am I not getting here?
That's one way to
Who
look
should I
at
be
it,
working
right?
with?
When
What
we,
else should I be doing? Should I change practitioner? Why is it still here? All of those things.
yeah, yeah,
Um, my life's on hold. I should be further ahead. 100
yeah,
million other thoughts. So that happened to me last night.
yeah. Well, I think everyone here probably relates to some degree. And so it's like, it's so normal. We want to have compassion for it. Yeah, it's like, it is hard to see, especially when you know this stuff and then you see yourself doing it,
Yeah,
but
it's even more
also,
annoying.
yeah,
So my question was, in relation to from the last book club and this one, from what you're explaining, my understanding, if I've understood correctly, is pain reprocessing therapy can be done in many different ways. Like if you're feeling safe with somebody or something, or if you're, regaining your social life after an illness, like lots of different ways in to calm the nervous system and calm the body down.
yeah,
So if somebody is, I don't know, doing CBT or working with a therapist or got a life coach or something, and then they wanted to do the PRT work, is that confusing for the brain? Like, should it just be one thing or another thing? Like, don't work with too many people, or is it all linked together? So, if somebody was wanting to do curable or work in curable groups or work with you or something, and then they've got the other side going on, is it too much overload into the brain? Should they just be doing one thing at a time?
oh yeah. I mean, all these kind of questions, it's so tricky because like everyone's nervous system is a little different. And even from 1 month to the next, my nervous system might be different, or 1 week to the next, right? So um, definitely there is that element of when you're doing too much, you will overload your system. And usually it's when you're doing it with the emotion of like catastrophizing and urgency. And because really we can do quite a bit. If you've ever kind of been in flow and you're just like really resonating with things, you can learn a lot of information or do a lot of, workbooks or types of things and not feel resistance and feel really good. So it's hard to know that it's the, amount of what you're doing, but I would really feel for yourself, really start to, with this body work, this leads us into being able to tune into our own emotions a little bit and feel what we feel is like the next good step for us, the next right step, or we feel, I like that word, in alignment with, not physical alignment, like I used to say with a physical therapist, but, kind of like that resonance with. There are probably some people that conflict. I've heard, I haven't read the Steve Ozanich book, but it sounds like it's similar in a lot of ways. But then he says to kind of talk to yourself harshly, where PRT doesn't do that. Some people resonate a little more with the, I just that tough love kind of thing. But there are, many different, it's hard because, right, there's many different podcasts and different people saying slightly different variations of the same thing, but definitely like I'm not in conflict with the types of things that Schubiner or Curable would say, other than there's a little bit of some diet stuff I've heard on Curable now that doesn't really follow PRT exactly. But anyway, the you
Yeah, or even if generally somebody had a life coach or a general therapist or something like that, that's up to, so what I guess I'm hearing is it's an individual choice. If you wish to continue with that and include PRT with it, you have to make your own choice based on your own nervous system. There's no direct conflict, but just see what feels in alignment. Is that right?
Yeah, because one life coach, they may frame things a little differently. I would imagine most life coaches and therapists would be supportive. When the question comes up for physical therapy, that can be kind of a confusing one for people where they're like, should I continue physical therapy or should I just dive into the PRT and just quit that? So I always just ask people to really feel like, is there this net positive for me, to really be aware of the fear? Because some people might go to the physical therapist and get a lot of reaffirming that there's fear-based stuff to worry about with their posture and the asymmetries, and they have to be stronger. And really, chances are none of that is true for them with neuroplastic pain. They could, the pain can turn off and on like a light switch. It doesn't have to do with the imbalance or the scoliosis or whatever, right? So if it is something like physical therapy, again, start to tune into like what increases your nervous system's state or like perception of danger. That's how they phrase it in the book. Like, if we don't know if it's causing fear or not exactly, does it seem like it's more dangerous to your brain or less dangerous to your brain? And so there might be times when you're first starting out that you want a lot of information and you want to have the life coach and the pain coach and you want to be listening to a lot, and that feels soothing to get all this information. Or there might be a freeze moment where you're overloaded and you want to kind of like just use your resources to just kind of focus on one thing at a time and be so compassionate with yourself about that, if that's where you are, because that's going to be your best course of healing if that's where you are, than trying to do a bunch of things and then pressuring yourself and not feeling good about them.
Okay, got it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And there's a couple other, I know we're at time, but let's just finish up these comments. You can always just have PT or do exercise for your body's health and to prevent other injuries, not only to deal with pain. Right. Yeah. For some people, like I said, it feels secure and it feels safe to know like I'm doing this, stuff to keep my body in prime physical condition. And for other people, they may go to a physical therapist and be reinforced with all the things that are wrong with their body. And this is why you have pain. And then the brain gets confused. And basically he says, when the brain believes the body is damaged, it responds with pain. When the brain believes the body is damaged, it responds with pain. So, and then Rachel, I just work with people that respect what I'm trying to do with PRT because otherwise it's too much. Yeah. And actually along those same lines, and this might help with you too, Nat, like, sometimes we think we need to like explain everything to other people, and especially like when family members or people in our friends and stuff are asking about our pain or what we're doing and what are like what is PRT, and we can't really explain it, and it doesn't, when we start to say it, then we start to have our own doubts and questions. So along with what Rachel was saying, people that respect what I'm trying to do with PRT, you can kind of set that stage too, to just be like, this is this thing I'm doing. And, part of it is really just not like talking a lot about the pain and the process, when I'm still working on healing and getting into it. So anyway, you could kind of, I really think you could do either. There's not one answer. I know, like I said, a lot of people will want more help and support. And so you could see it that way, or you could, just if it's too much and it feels like, there's one thing you're more comfortable with, that's the main thing with this process. It's not so much what we do or don't do, it's our emotion behind it. Are we in the parasympathetic calm state, the rest and repair state, or are we in a fear-based state? Okay. All right, you guys, great time seeing you. And for those of you who participated and got on that way, thank you. And thanks everyone who's joining or who joined and who's listening back. And we will do the same thing next week. We will be talking about chapters 5 and 6, getting into somatic tracking. And I don't remember what chapter 6 is, but all right, you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.